Your soulmate is already married, but what they did next will shock you. Stay. Please don't scroll. I know your instinct right now might be to look away, because even reading this title probably made your chest tighten a little. That reaction is not random. It's recognition. And if this message has found you, it's because you've been carrying something quietly, something you don't talk about, something you don't even fully admit to yourself. You didn't plan this. You didn't go looking for trouble, confusion, or heartbreak. You weren't trying to fall into something complicated. In fact, if you're honest, you did everything you could not to feel what you felt. You tried to stay logical. You tried to be respectful. You tried to shut it down before it even had a chance to grow. And then you learned the truth: your soulmate is already married. That moment doesn't feel like a dramatic breakup scene. It feels like the air leaving your lungs. Like the floor going quiet underneath you. Your mind tells you one thing: this is wrong, this is over, this shouldn't exist, but your heart doesn't get the memo. It doesn't suddenly switch off. It just hurts in a deeper, more confusing way. You may have felt guilt immediately. Guilt for feeling anything at all. Guilt for wishing circumstances were different. Guilt for not being able to erase a connection that felt real long before you understood why. You may have told yourself, I need to disappear now. I need to step back. I need to be the mature one, And you tried. But here's the part nobody prepares you for. Even after you knew, the connection didn't turn ugly. It didn't turn reckless. It didn't turn secretive or inappropriate in the way people assume these stories always do. It didn't explode into drama or fade into nothing. Instead, it did something far more unsettling. It became quieter. Deeper. Heavier. Because what they did next wasn't what most people would do. They didn't cross a line. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They didn't use you as an escape from their life. They chose restraint. And that choice changes everything. They stayed aware. Careful. Respectful. Not distant in a cold way, but contained in a deliberate one. You could feel it. The way they spoke changed. The way they looked at you carried weight but not hunger. The way they listened felt intentional, almost painful in its sincerity. That's when it hit you. This wasn't about attraction alone. This wasn't about temptation. This wasn't about fantasy. This was about recognition happening too late. Because when someone sees you deeply and doesn't act on it recklessly, it reveals something terrifying: integrity. And integrity hurts more than betrayal ever could, because it leaves no villain to blame. If they had pursued you, you could have walked away angry. If they had vanished, you could have convinced yourself it was nothing. But they did neither. They honored the connection by refusing to misuse it. And now you're left holding something with no safe place to put it. You start questioning everything. Why did this happen now? Why did two souls recognize each other when the timing was so wrong? Is the universe cruel, or is it trying to teach you something you didn't ask to learn? What makes it even harder is what happened inside them after meeting you. You noticed changes. Not dramatic announcements, subtle shifts. They became more reflective. More honest with themselves. Less comfortable with pretending everything in their life was fine. You didn't become their escape. You became their mirror. And mirrors are dangerous, because they don't flatter. They reveal. They started seeing the parts of themselves they had buried. The compromises they had made. The emotional truths they had postponed. Not because you demanded anything, but because meeting you reminded them of who they used to be. That realization doesn't feel romantic. It feels destabilizing. And here's the part that shocks most people when they finally understand it: this connection was never meant to be acted on in the way movies portray love. It was meant to awaken something. To interrupt autopilot. To force honesty where comfort had settled in. You weren't the temptation. You were the truth that arrived without permission. And that's why this hurts in a way that's hard to explain. You're grieving something that never fully happened. You're letting go of a future you never had the right to imagine, but still somehow did. You're mourning recognition without resolution. People don't talk about this kind of pain. They talk about affairs. They talk about cheating. They talk about right and wrong in black and white terms. But they don't talk about what it feels like when two people do the right thing and still end up broken open by it. You are not weak for feeling this. You are not wrong for caring. You are not a mistake in someone else's story. You were a moment of truth. And what they did next, choosing integrity over impulse, responsibility over desire, wasn't meant to punish you. It was meant to reveal something that will change both of you forever. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of understanding what kind of love you actually deserve, and what kind of timing your soul will never accept again. If this stirred something deep inside you, it's because this message wasn't meant to be casual. And neither was that connection. Stay with this, because now the story moves past shock and into the part nobody warns you about, the part where the connection doesn't disappear, but it also doesn't have anywhere to go. This is where the weight really settles in. After you realized they were married, you probably thought time would do the work for you. That distance would dull the feeling. That logic would eventually override the pull. You might have expected the connection to weaken, to fade into something harmless and forgettable. That's what usually happens when something isn't meant to be. But this didn't behave like something unmeant. Instead of fading, it became quieter. More contained. Less dramatic, but heavier in a way that followed you into still moments. Late at night. Early in the morning. In the spaces where you weren't distracted enough to avoid feeling. You didn't fantasize about stealing them away. You didn't imagine a secret future. If anything, you did the opposite. You pushed the thoughts away. You disciplined your heart. You reminded yourself of reality again and again. And yet, the knowing remained. Not longing in the childish sense. Not obsession. Just a steady awareness that something real had touched your life and then stopped mid-breath. What made it harder was how they handled it. They didn't use you as emotional escape. They didn't dump their dissatisfaction onto you. They didn't lean on you to fill what was missing in their marriage. If they had, you could have drawn a clean line and walked away. Instead, they carried themselves with restraint that felt almost painful to witness. You could see them holding back words they wanted to say. You could feel them choosing silence over honesty when honesty might cross a line. You could sense the effort it took for them to do the right thing. And that effort mattered. Because effort reveals value. You started realizing that this connection wasn't dangerous because it was reckless, it was dangerous because it was responsible. Because it lived in the space of what could be acknowledged but not acted upon. That kind of connection doesn't burn out quickly. It doesn't explode. It just stays. You might have noticed yourself grieving something without being able to explain what you were grieving. Not a breakup. Not a relationship. But the loss of possibility. The loss of timing. The loss of a version of life where this connection could have existed freely. And grief without permission is heavy. You couldn't talk about it openly. People wouldn't understand. They would reduce it to labels. Right, wrong, inappropriate, foolish. They wouldn't see the nuance. They wouldn't feel the restraint. They wouldn't understand how two people can do everything right and still end up hurting. So you carried it quietly. You told yourself you were strong for handling it maturely. And you were. But strength doesn't cancel pain. It just teaches you how to hold it without breaking. Meanwhile, something was happening inside them that you couldn't ignore. They were changing. Not in a way that felt performative or dramatic. In a subtle, unsettling way. They became more introspective. Less certain. Less comfortable with the life they had built on autopilot. You didn't hear them complain, but you sensed the questioning. You saw how meeting you disrupted something they had been avoiding for a long time. Not because you were better than their partner. Not because you were more exciting. But because you represented a version of themselves they hadn't been living as. You didn't compete with their marriage. You contrasted it. And contrast creates awareness. That awareness didn't make them reckless, it made them quiet. And quiet people are often the ones doing the deepest internal work. This is where the confusion intensified for you. Because now you weren't just dealing with your feelings, you were witnessing theirs without being able to step into them. You could feel that they cared, but not in a way that demanded anything from you. You could feel that they were affected, but not in a way that put responsibility on your shoulders. That kind of care is rare. And rare things are hard to let go of, even when you know you must. You may have wondered whether this connection was a mistake. Whether you should have shut it down earlier. Whether you should have never allowed it to exist at all. But deep down, you know that's not how it works. You didn't create this by force. It arrived on its own. And what arrives on its own usually has a reason. This is the part people misunderstand. Not every soulmate arrives to stay. Some arrive to wake you up. To show you what resonance feels like. To teach you what depth without chaos looks like. To recalibrate your standards forever. And that realization hurts almost as much as it heals. Because now you can't unknow what connection is supposed to feel like. You can't go back to shallow comfort. You can't pretend timing doesn't matter. You can't accept half presence anymore. This connection raised the bar without giving you the prize. And that feels unfair. You might feel anger at the universe. Or sadness that comes in waves. Or moments where you wish they had been selfish just once so you could walk away cleanly. But they weren't. They chose integrity. And integrity leaves emotional residue. It leaves you changed. You are not the same person you were before this. You're more aware now. More discerning. Less willing to settle for almost. Less tolerant of emotional fog. You've seen what recognition feels like, and you know how rare it is. That's not a curse. It's a preparation. Even if right now it feels like a wound. This part of the story isn't about resolution yet. It's about understanding why this hurts the way it does. Why walking away doesn't feel clean. Why staying connected emotionally feels impossible. You're standing in the space between meaning and action. And that space is uncomfortable. But it's also sacred. Because it's where integrity lives. And whether you realize it yet or not, this connection, unfinished, restrained, and painfully real, has already done what it came to do. It changed you. And what changes you deeply never disappears without leaving wisdom behind. This isn't where the story ends. It's where the lesson begins to reveal itself. Stay with this feeling, because now the story moves into the part that is the hardest to explain and the easiest to misunderstand, the part where nothing happens, yet everything inside you keeps changing. This is where time stretches, where days pass normally on the outside, but internally you feel like you're living inside a question that never fully closes. After the initial shock, after the restraint, after the quiet realization that this connection has no obvious future, something unexpected happens. Life doesn't collapse. The world doesn't punish you. Things don't explode into drama. Instead, everything keeps going, and that's what makes it so heavy. You wake up, do what you're supposed to do, smile when required, show up where life asks you to. And all the while, this unspoken truth lives inside you, like a second heartbeat. You begin to notice how often your mind returns to the same thought, not in obsession, but in reflection. Why did this happen at all? Not why did I fall, not why did they appear, but why did this connection exist if it was never meant to be lived out? You're not looking for justification anymore. You're looking for meaning. Because meaningless pain is unbearable, but meaningful pain can be carried. And the truth is, this connection keeps teaching you things long after you stopped expecting lessons. You start to see how rare it is for two people to recognize each other and still choose not to destroy their lives over it. That kind of restraint is not common. Most people act out of impulse, fear, or desire. Most people blur lines and then clean up the damage later. But here, damage was prevented, and yet, impact remained. That contradiction forces you to mature emotionally in ways you didn't ask for. You realize that love doesn't only exist in expression. Sometimes it exists in refusal. In silence. In the choice to protect something by not touching it. And that realization rewires how you understand intimacy itself. You stop romanticizing chaos. You stop equating intensity with destiny. You start seeing how depth can exist without possession. That shift is not gentle. It costs you innocence. Before this, you might have believed that if something felt right, it would naturally find its place. That love would align with timing if it was real enough. Now you know better. Now you understand that truth and timing are not obligated to meet each other. Sometimes truth arrives early, and timing arrives later, or never. And that knowledge is sobering. You also begin to notice how this experience has made you more honest with yourself. You no longer lie about what you feel just to appear composed. You don't judge yourself for emotions that don't fit clean categories. You allow complexity to exist inside you without rushing to label it. That emotional maturity wasn't taught to you, it was carved into you. There are moments when you miss them in a quiet way. Not in a way that makes you reach out, not in a way that asks for more. Just a passing ache. A recognition. A thought that floats through and then passes. And you let it pass, because you've learned the difference between honoring a feeling and acting on it. That distinction becomes one of the most important lessons of your life. You also see how this connection has raised your standards permanently. You can't unknow what it feels like to be truly seen. You can't pretend shallow connection is enough anymore. You're not impressed by charm without depth. You're not comforted by consistency without awareness. Something in you has shifted, and it won't go back. This can feel lonely at first. Because once your standards rise, fewer things fit. You may notice that conversations feel flatter than they used to. That certain relationships feel noisy, performative, or emotionally thin. Not because those people are bad, but because you've tasted something real, and your nervous system remembers it. And memory is powerful. At the same time, you begin to feel a strange gratitude mixed with sadness. Gratitude for having experienced recognition at all. Sadness for knowing it couldn't stay. Those emotions coexist without canceling each other out, and learning to hold them both makes you stronger than you realize. You're no longer chasing clarity from them. You're no longer wondering what they're thinking or feeling. That chapter has softened. What occupies you now is a deeper question: what do I do with who I've become because of this? Because you are not the same. You're more aware. More grounded. More intolerant of emotional dishonesty, especially your own. You don't want love that requires shrinking. You don't want connection that survives on avoidance. You don't want intensity without integrity. This connection, unfinished and restrained, has refined you. And refinement often comes with a sense of quiet grief. Not for the person, but for the simplicity you once had. You now see emotional reality in layers. You notice subtext. You feel energy shifts. You understand restraint and responsibility in ways most people never have to. That awareness can feel heavy. But it's also what will protect you. One day, when someone free and available meets you with the same depth, you'll recognize it instantly. Not because it feels familiar in a painful way, but because it feels honest without fear. And you'll know the difference, because you've lived both sides. This experience wasn't meant to trap you in longing. It was meant to sharpen your discernment. You are learning that not every soulmate is meant to be chosen, and not every deep connection is meant to become a relationship. Some are meant to stand as proof of what's possible, and as a reminder of what you will no longer accept less than. That realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, late at night, when you realize you're no longer angry, no longer confused, no longer waiting. You're simply aware. Aware of your depth. Aware of your capacity. Aware of your worth. And that awareness will shape the rest of your life. This part of the story isn't about them anymore. It's about you carrying forward what this connection unlocked, without carrying the pain with it forever. Because one day, this won't feel like loss. It will feel like preparation. Stay here a little longer, because now we're entering the part of the story that feels the most still on the outside and the most transformative on the inside. This is the chapter where the connection no longer asks you to feel, it asks you to integrate. And integration is quieter than pain, but far more powerful. At some point, you begin to notice that the ache has changed shape. It's no longer sharp or destabilizing. It doesn't hijack your day or knock the air out of your chest the way it once did. Instead, it lives deeper, softer, almost like a memory stored in your body rather than a wound you're actively bleeding from. And that's how you know something important has happened. You're no longer surviving the experience, you're absorbing it. You start to realize that this connection didn't come to disrupt your life forever. It came to interrupt a version of you that was willing to accept less than what you now know is possible. Before this, you might have been capable of settling, not because you lacked depth, but because you hadn't yet encountered a mirror clear enough to show you exactly how deep you go. Now you've seen it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This awareness changes how you relate to everyone. You listen differently now. You notice pauses, hesitations, emotional gaps. You sense when someone is present with you and when they're merely occupying space. You no longer confuse attention with intimacy or words with truth. You feel the difference in your body before your mind ever names it. That sensitivity isn't weakness, it's intelligence earned through experience. There are moments when you look back and realize how much restraint this connection required from you, too. Not just from them. You chose silence when speaking might have relieved your own discomfort. You chose dignity when longing might have tempted you to cross a line. You chose respect, not because it was easy, but because something in you knew that betraying your values would cost you more than losing a possibility. That choice shaped you. You are no longer someone who mistakes chemistry for alignment. You understand now that real connection doesn't demand secrecy, confusion, or emotional compromise. You understand that what feels intense is not always what is safe, and what is safe is not always what is shallow. That clarity came at a price, but it gave you something invaluable in return. You also begin to forgive yourself in a deeper way. You forgive yourself for not walking away sooner, because you see now that you needed to feel the full weight of this to understand it. You forgive yourself for caring, because caring was never the problem. You forgive yourself for being human in a situation that offered no clean rules, only ethical ones. Forgiveness doesn't erase the story. It frees you from living inside it. At the same time, you may notice that thoughts of them arise less frequently now. And when they do, they don't pull you backward. They come like a quiet acknowledgement rather than a longing. There's no urge to reach out, no need to know how they're doing, no curiosity that hooks you emotionally. Just a soft recognition that two paths crossed briefly and altered each other forever. That's not detachment. That's completion. Completion doesn't mean the connection wasn't significant. It means it has finished teaching you what it came to teach. And now, its presence in your life has shifted from active experience to internal wisdom. This is where your relationship to timing changes, too. You stop asking why things happened when they did. You stop wondering how life might have looked if circumstances were different. You accept that timing isn't something you negotiate with, it's something you learn from. And what you learned here is that love without freedom is not a destination, no matter how deep it feels. That truth settles into your bones. You become more patient with the right things and less patient with the wrong ones. You're no longer willing to invest in emotional dead ends. You don't argue with red flags or romanticize obstacles. You don't stay where clarity is delayed indefinitely. Not because you're afraid of pain, but because you respect your time. And that respect for your time changes everything. You may also notice a subtle shift in how you imagine your future now. It feels cleaner, quieter, less dramatic. You're no longer chasing an overwhelming love story, you're open to a steady, mutual one. One where availability isn't a question, where integrity isn't a test, where timing doesn't require sacrifice of self. You're no longer impressed by intensity alone. You want peace that doesn't numb you. Depth that doesn't destabilize you. Love that doesn't ask you to disappear. This experience refined your definition of love. It taught you that the right connection won't ask you to live in secrecy or emotional restraint forever. It won't arrive already tied to someone else's life. It won't require you to translate integrity into loneliness. And because you've lived through the opposite, you will recognize the real thing instantly when it arrives. Not because it feels explosive, but because it feels clear. You'll feel it in the absence of anxiety, in the lack of internal debate, in the ease of showing up fully without fear of crossing invisible lines. You'll know it because it won't ask you to betray yourself in order to stay. This is the quiet gift hidden inside everything you went through. You weren't given this connection to suffer endlessly. You were given it to grow discernment, self-respect, and emotional authority. And now, standing where you are, you can feel that authority settling into you. You don't need external validation anymore. You don't need to explain your boundaries or justify your choices. You trust yourself in a way that can't be shaken by what-ifs or missed chances. That trust is the real ending of this chapter. The story doesn't close with reunion or regret. It closes with understanding, deep, embodied understanding that reshapes how you love going forward. You didn't lose something you were meant to keep. You gained something you were meant to become. And from this place, whatever comes next will meet you at your level, not in confusion, not in restraint, not in silence, but in freedom. That's how you'll know the difference. That's how you'll know this chapter is complete. And that's why this experience, as painful and complex as it was, will one day feel less like heartbreak and more like preparation for the love that won't ask you to wait in the shadows. You're not behind. You're ready. And that readiness is the quiet power you carry forward now. Stay with me a little longer, because now we're reaching the part of the journey that most people never talk about, the moment when you finally stop asking why this happened and start understanding who you became because it did. This is not the end in a dramatic sense. It's the quiet return to yourself after carrying something heavy for a long time. By now, you may have noticed that the connection no longer dominates your emotional space the way it once did. It hasn't vanished, but it has softened. It no longer feels like a question demanding an answer. It feels more like a truth that has already been accepted. That shift doesn't happen suddenly. It happens the day you realize you're no longer waiting for something to change. You're no longer waiting for them to be free. You're no longer waiting for timing to fix itself. You're no longer waiting for life to explain itself to you. And that's when real healing begins. At some point, you stop replaying moments in your head, not because they've lost meaning, but because you no longer need them to justify how deeply you felt. You no longer need proof that the connection was real. You lived it. It shaped you. That's enough now. What replaces the ache is a kind of grounded clarity. You understand now that this connection wasn't meant to be resolved in the traditional way. It wasn't meant to become a relationship, a future, or a shared life. It was meant to become a reference point, a moment in time that recalibrated your emotional compass. And that recalibration changes everything. You start noticing how differently you show up in your own life. You're less reactive. Less willing to romanticize emotional unavailability. Less tempted by connections that feel intense but lack stability. You don't chase closure anymore. You don't need someone else to confirm what you already know. That confidence didn't come from certainty. It came from surviving uncertainty without losing yourself. You also begin to recognize how much strength it took to handle this the way you did. You didn't explode. You didn't manipulate. You didn't cross lines just to feel something. You chose restraint even when no one would have blamed you for doing otherwise. That choice matters. It tells you something about your character. You are someone who values integrity over impulse. You are someone who can feel deeply without acting destructively. You are someone who can love without needing to possess. Those qualities will shape the rest of your life far more than this single connection ever could. You may still feel moments of sadness, not because you want the past back, but because you're human. Because something meaningful passed through your life briefly and left a mark. That's not weakness. That's evidence of depth. But now, sadness doesn't spiral you. It doesn't pull you backward. It comes, it's acknowledged, and it passes. That's emotional maturity. You're also beginning to see how this experience has changed the way you relate to time. You no longer rush connection. You no longer ignore red flags because chemistry feels good. You understand that timing is not an inconvenience, it's part of alignment. If something requires you to wait in silence, hide parts of yourself, or live in restraint indefinitely, it's not meant to be your destination. That lesson is now embedded in you. You may even notice that you feel more peaceful being alone than you did before. Not lonely, peaceful. Because you're no longer trying to fill a gap. You're not searching for something to replace what you lost. You're complete in a way you weren't before this happened. That completeness came from choosing yourself again and again in moments where it would have been easier to disappear into longing. This is where the story truly turns inward. You start asking yourself better questions. Not, why wasn't I chosen, but what kind of love do I want to choose next? Not, what did I lose, but what have I learned about myself? And the answers are different now. You know you want a love that's available. A love that doesn't arrive already attached to someone else's life. A love that doesn't require restraint to survive. You want a love that meets you openly, clearly, and without apology. And because you've lived through the opposite, you will never settle for less. This connection didn't break you. It clarified you. It taught you that love without freedom is not enough, no matter how deep it feels. It taught you that being seen is powerful, but being chosen in the open matters just as much. It taught you that integrity can hurt, but it never leaves you empty. You might look back now and realize that this experience was a turning point, not because of what you lost, but because of what you stopped tolerating afterward. You stopped tolerating ambiguity that drains you. You stopped tolerating emotional half-steps. You stopped tolerating connections that ask you to live in the background. That's growth. And growth often arrives disguised as loss. What you're standing in now is acceptance, not resignation, not bitterness, not denial. Acceptance that some connections come to shape us, not stay with us. Acceptance that timing matters. Acceptance that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, but it always leads you back to yourself. You are no longer carrying this story as a wound. You are carrying it as wisdom. And wisdom doesn't weigh you down. It steadies you. As you move forward, you'll notice that life responds differently to you. You attract people who are clearer. Situations that are cleaner. Connections that don't require decoding. That's not luck. That's alignment responding to alignment. This is the part of the story where you stop looking back to see if it still hurts. Because it doesn't in the same way anymore. It feels complete. Not because everything made sense. But because you do now. And from this place, whatever love comes next won't ask you to hide, wait, or restrain yourself to keep it alive. It will meet you fully, just as you are now. And when that happens, you'll understand something quietly and clearly. This wasn't the love that passed you by. This was the love that prepared you. And preparation is sometimes the most profound gift of all. Stay with me until the very end, because this final part isn't about closure in the way people usually expect it. It's about arrival. Not their arrival into your life, not a reunion, not a dramatic turning point, but your arrival into yourself. This is where the story stops circling pain and starts resting in truth. By now, something inside you has settled in a way that feels unfamiliar but right. You're no longer carrying this connection as an open question. You're carrying it as a chapter that has already shaped you. The emotional noise around it has softened. The urgency has dissolved. What remains is understanding, and understanding is quiet. You're not replaying conversations anymore. You're not imagining alternate timelines. You're not wondering what would have happened if circumstances were different. Those thoughts may still pass through your mind occasionally, but they don't hook into you. They don't pull you under. They come and go like memories, not like unfinished business. That's how you know something has truly integrated. This is the moment when you realize you're no longer emotionally waiting. Waiting used to feel like holding your breath. Now it feels like standing still and breathing freely. That shift didn't happen because something outside you changed. It happened because you did. You stopped orienting your emotional life around an outcome you couldn't control. You stopped hoping that time would rearrange itself to make something impossible suddenly easy. You stopped negotiating with reality. And in doing so, you found peace. You now see this connection for what it truly was, not a mistake, not a temptation, not a tragedy, but a mirror. It arrived to show you the depth you carry, the integrity you live by, and the kind of love your soul responds to. It showed you what recognition feels like, and just as importantly, it showed you what restraint rooted in values looks like. That combination changed you. Before this, you might have believed that love should always be acted on if it's real enough. Now you know better. You know that real love doesn't just ask, do I feel something? It asks, who do I become if I follow this? And sometimes, the most loving choice is not pursuit, but protection. Protection of yourself. Protection of others. Protection of your future. You chose that, even when it hurt. And that choice has given you a quiet strength that doesn't announce itself, but it shows up everywhere now. In how you carry yourself. In how you respond to emotional ambiguity. In how you no longer explain your boundaries or apologize for your needs. You are no longer afraid of walking away from what cannot meet you. That's not because you don't care. It's because you care deeply, and wisely. You might notice that you feel more anchored in your body now. More present. Less reactive. You're not scanning for signs or hidden meanings. You trust what's in front of you. You trust how things feel instead of how you wish they would feel. That trust is the fruit of everything you went through. You've also let go of the need to be understood by everyone. You no longer feel the urge to explain this story, to justify your emotions, or to make others see the nuance. You know now that some experiences are meant to be understood only by the person who lived them. And that's okay. You don't need validation for your integrity. You don't need permission for your healing. You don't need an apology to move on. What you needed, you gave yourself: honesty. Honesty about what you felt. Honesty about what you could not do. Honesty about what you deserve. That honesty is now the foundation of your emotional life. You are also beginning to sense how this experience has quietly reoriented your future. You're no longer drawn to unavailable people, complicated dynamics, or love that lives in the shadows. Even if the chemistry is there, your body knows better now. It knows the cost. You want openness. You want freedom. You want a love that doesn't ask you to wait in restraint or silence to keep it alive. And because you want that, you will not miss it when it arrives. This is the paradox of growth. What once would have felt like destiny now feels like a lesson, and what once felt too simple will feel like peace. Peace will no longer bore you. Because you've learned that peace is not the absence of depth, it's depth without chaos. You might still think of them from time to time, but not with longing. More with a sense of respect. For the role they played. For the mirror they held up. For the way the connection was honored rather than exploited. That respect doesn't tie you to them. It releases you. You can wish them well without wondering where you stand. You can acknowledge what was real without reopening what's complete. You can carry gratitude without reopening grief. That balance is emotional mastery. This is where the story truly ends, not with them choosing you or not choosing you, but with you choosing yourself without resentment. Without bitterness. Without closing your heart. You didn't harden. You clarified. And clarity is what allows love to enter your life cleanly next time. You're no longer the person who would accept being an afterthought, a secret, or a possibility postponed. You are someone who knows that love must be free to be real, and available to be lived. That knowing is now part of you. So when the next connection comes, and it will, you won't question whether you're allowed to want more. You won't wonder if you're asking too much. You won't silence yourself to preserve something fragile. You'll recognize alignment instantly. And if something isn't aligned, you'll walk away without drama, because you've already learned that staying in restraint for too long costs you yourself. This chapter didn't take something from you. It gave you discernment. It gave you self-respect. It gave you emotional authority. And those gifts will shape every love that follows. You didn't lose the love of your life. You found the version of yourself who will never settle for less than a love that can meet you fully, openly, and freely. That is the real ending. And also the real beginning.